Good evening, ladies. In today's video, we're going to be talking about the best performing blockchain over the last few months, which has just set a new world record for transactions per second. In a public test, they hit 11 million transactions per second, which is orders of magnitude faster than any other blockchain out there. And it's backed by the previous CEO of Google, who did a large enough investment into this project. And the project is called Keeta. Ticker is KTA. It hasn't gone to mainnet launch yet. However, you can buy the token. It's still in testnet, but you can buy the token on base. So in today's video, I want to go through exactly the technology that makes this new chain so fast in comparison. Like you can see, it's transactions per second in comparison to the other top blockchains. So it's just smoking everything in terms of speed, in terms of transactions per second. And it has 400 millisecond finality, which is comparable to the other top chains for speed in the world, like Sui and Solana, etc. This chain is specifically designed for payments and transfers in a regulated fashion. So it's partnerships with all the idea is to have partnerships with all the top banks and regulators, and everything's going to be KYC and AML friendly, which is really important going into the institutional adoption phase of crypto. So in today's video, I want to give you my thoughts on the tech, go through it all, and give you my opinion on whether or not I'm going to be buying it, because it's been performing like crazy recently, as you can see, and it's finally had a bit of a pullback. So I was sidelined to just watch it a little bit, didn't bother buying into such a parabolic chart, but now that it's pulled back a bit, I wanted to see if there's enough substance there for me to invest in it myself. So let's get straight into the tech. So if you don't care about the technology that I'm going to explain, you can skip forward. I'll leave a little, it's not going to be long, but I'll leave little timestamps if you want to fast forward until the other interesting things about this project. So firstly, Keeta uses a DAG approach as opposed to other blockchains like Bitcoin and Ethereum, where every single node has to come to consensus and agree for every transaction to go through, and a block of transactions is added to the blockchain. With Keeta's approach, there's multiple blockchains, like every single participant has their own blockchain and they write transactions onto their own blockchain, and they're basically writing all these transactions saying, I sent this to him, I sent that to her, and then eventually all these chains converge and agree with each other. So basically what that allows for is a lot of parallelization, meaning instead of only one transaction being able to be added to the chain at a time, you can have parallel transactions, like going 24/7 all at the same time, writing transactions, and then eventually syncing up at the end of the day. Obviously, a lot of blockchains use parallelization, such as Solana, such as Sei, such as most really fast blockchains use parallelization, but this is a different approach. So for example, Solana uses parallelization for transactions that aren't similar. If I'm sending Solana to that person and then this person is minting an NFT on this website, so these two transactions are completely separate, then Solana allows for those transactions to be inputted in parallel rather than having to wait one after the other. Keeta, however, every single transaction can just be firing off at the same time. So it's just like, that's why it can be so fast. But there are some downsides to that architecture that we'll discuss. But the main advantage to that, like with Solana has to first check that the transaction that you're writing doesn't, if you want it to go in parallel with other transactions, Solana has to check that those transactions are completely independent, which obviously slows it down a little bit. With Keeta, it doesn't have to check, they both can just fire off at the same time because they're being written on their own blockchain, and then those blockchains eventually sync up at a later time. Whereas Solana, you have to check it first and then say, okay, we can fire both of these off at the same time, which slows it down a little bit. What's the downside of this for Keeta? It's not a globally shared state like Solana is. So with Solana, it's a globally shared state, meaning every blockchain or everyone's version of the blockchain has to agree. Whereas with Keeta's, the ordering of transactions doesn't have to agree. So I can say this happened before that happened, and someone else can say the inverse. Whereas Solana, everyone has to agree before it's finalized on the blockchain. That means, like with Solana, it's much more suited as a general purpose layer 1, much more suited for a decentralized NASDAQ, because obviously if I buy something on a Solana decentralized exchange and then someone else tries to buy the same thing, the order of those transactions matter a lot, because my buy is going to impact the price of that asset on Solana. So if this person manages to put their transaction ahead of mine, even though I went first theoretically, that's like not good for a decentralized NASDAQ whatsoever. Whereas with Keeta, it isn't focused on that whatsoever. Like the centralized NASDAQ is not what it's going for. It's just for payments. So if I send money to Bob and Lucy sends money to Alice, whatever, it doesn't really matter if this transaction was before that transaction, if you get what I mean. So they can just run in parallel. The ordering doesn't really matter, but on a general purpose layer 1 like Solana, it really matters. So it's not a globally shared state. It's like different microstates, different blockchains which eventually sync up, and the ordering can be a little bit off. The other way it achieves this scale, it's specifically designed to be horizontally scalable, meaning that if you want to scale up the amount of transactions that can go through, you can just use more computers rather than having a more powerful single computer processing transactions. So basically it's designed to be validated in data centers like AWS and whatever other Microsoft Cloud, etc. It's designed for horizontal scaling, whereas other blockchains, although a lot of them, like the compute power is also in data centers, it's not really designed in that way so much. So the benefit is higher speed, but the trade-off is potentially probably a little bit less decentralized than other blockchains like Solana or Ethereum. Now, although they did do a public test, I would like to see the mainnet launch before I bought anything or really like put a lot of money into something like this. You know, it's very well and good that you had 10 million transactions per second in a testnet, but it's very different when you're dealing with real world use cases. And I think Solana is the only blockchain that's really been battle tested in this regard. Stuff like the Trump meme coin launch, where there was just so like an insane amount of activity. Something like that kind of shows that Solana is able to handle and be capable to handle a crazy amount of real world different transactions at the same time. Okay, so that's kind of a very basic overview on how the tech works. What are some other use cases that Keeta has built into its chain? One of them is, like I mentioned at the start, it's super designed for regulation, KYC, and anti-money laundering. So basically, you can get yourself a KYC account on Keeta. That will be like an NFT stored on your wallet that will say, yep, this is a real person, but it won't say, obviously, who you are. It will just say, this is a KYC person from this jurisdiction, because obviously banks need to. So number one, they need to know who's sending money, who they're sending money to. So they're not sending it to a terrorist, they're not sending it to someone in crime, or they're not sending it to jurisdictions that they can't send money to, and vice versa. But number two, it's also very important that all of this data isn't public and they can send and receive transactions privately. So like if I want to send money to someone, I don't want everyone to know that necessarily. Or if I buy an OnlyFans subscription, maybe I don't want the entire world to know that, or, you know, you get my point. So private transactions and KYC, AML, money laundering is all built into the chain in a very nice way. Solana also has done this, like the same kind of concepts. They brought this out 6 months ago, maybe even longer at this point. And I'm not sure if it's really taken off yet, that use case, but it is actually a use case on Solana. They already have this built. However, I do think it's interesting that they set this up like being built into the chain already, and they're already trying to partner with banks and stuff. So it is nice with the whole TradFi and institutions coming into crypto. They're going to look at something like this and be like, okay, we can finally use crypto now because it has these rules, it has these regulations, and it has these use cases that we need in order to be compliant with all the regulators. The other novel approach that they've implemented are these things called anchors. So basically, these are essentially like bridges. So you could, for example, swap your Keeta into Bitcoin directly, or you can buy euros with your Keeta through an exchange directly on the chain using these anchors, or like another word is bridges. Now, obviously, bridges are always a little bit dangerous, and they're always a little bit like, that's often where a lot of vulnerabilities come into crypto when it comes to hacks and stuff. So we'll have to see if this works out, but it is a cool idea in the fact that it directly links and connects real world TradFi to the blockchain, and also other assets on other chains. Like, you can do cross-chain swaps, cross-chain DEX swaps, and like real world TradFi banks into Keeta chain. So pretty cool idea that I don't think any other chain really has to that extent. Another really nice feature that they have is built-in tokenization. Obviously, real world assets are one of the biggest use cases of crypto, being able to send real world assets across chain. They have tokenization built into the chain itself. So you'll be able to put real world assets onto Keeta, the Keeta chain, and financial regulators will be able to put real world assets onto the Keeta chain and use rules like we mentioned before to say, like, oh, you can't trade or send these real world assets unless it's to a verify KYC account, KYC wallet. Like, none of these things are on the chain already. Like I said, it's still in testnet. It's still not mainnet, and all of these things are set to come out. But you can see that they're thinking ahead of what are institutions going to need, what are banks going to want in order to use a blockchain. So another thing that they're building is DEX, that like integrated DEX. So a good analogy would be something like Hyperliquid, where the DEX is built by the same team and it's integrated with the chain directly. So that'll be very useful. And the last use case that I'll touch on is Keeta Pay. So you can see they're just really focused on payments, swaps, transfers, and Keeta Pay is a mobile app that they're building where you'll be able to use this DEX like you would be able to use Revolut or Venmo or Cash App or something. So it makes a lot of sense for a blockchain to have something like this. So there's a lot of bullish catalysts in the form of use cases that they're bringing onto this chain, and yeah, they really thought of all the best ideas in my opinion. Okay, so let's talk about the valuation and whether or not it's a good investment. So firstly, they kind of stealth launched this project. So usually with a new layer 1, with a new layer 2, there would have been VCs who got in super early at a low market cap, and then they launch it at billions in market cap, and then it's just a down only chart for 1 or 2 years, and it doesn't really get adoption a lot of the time. One of the only projects that did well with this model was something like Sui, but even still it hasn't been like a crazy performer like Keeta has. The reason Keeta's performed so well is because they launched it at basically a zero market cap. They let the community get in, and when you let the community get in and get rich off your coin, a lot of the time a strong community builds around that coin as well, which has started to happen with Keeta. And if you do want to buy Keeta, you can buy it on Matcha.xyz. This is a DEX aggregator which works across chain if you want, or on the same chain. So if you have money on Base, you can buy Keeta directly, or you can do a cross chain like I said. And this video is sponsored by Matcha, so I'd hugely appreciate if you would use the link in the description, my referral link. This is the perfect place to do all your trades. It's kind of similar to Jupiter, except it works cross chain. It works on any chain that you like, so it's brilliant in that regard. And obviously it's going to find the cheapest route to get whatever coin you're trying to get. Here you can see their tokenomics, pretty standard enough, but all the team tokens, all the VC tokens are vested, so they can't just dump on your head straight away. So it's a little bit more of a fair launch than what we're used to over the last couple of years. And I think, yeah, the tide has turned. I think a lot of VC scam coins realize that they can't do that anymore. No one's going to buy their garbage at billions in market cap. So I think a lot of these chains have started to realize that, and the tides are turning, and you're able to actually make money on new launches again, potentially. So that's brilliant for us retail investors. Like this, obviously it did have some VC backing, but not like, they didn't raise hundreds and hundreds of millions and launch at $1 billion market cap. They raised like 30, 40 million and launched at like a 40 million market cap or something like that. It's still not on any tier 1 exchanges. So once it is on the likes of Coinbase and Binance, that's probably a bullish catalyst to come down the road. The mainnet hasn't launched. It was supposed to launch in June, but it still hasn't launched yet. So I'm not sure when it is actually going to launch, but that could be a good sell the news event and potentially a buying opportunity if it does dump after that. For me, just looking at this chart, I think, it's had quite a big pullback after a huge epic run. Maybe it's going to take a bit of time to consolidate, and that could be a potential entry. Now, there are some drawbacks that I find with this layer 1. It's not a general purpose layer 1. It's just for transfers. It's just for payments. It's just for swaps, atomic swaps. So you could sell Bitcoin to buy Keeta. You could buy gold using Ripple. I don't know, any sort of atomic swap like that. But you can't have smart contracts. There's no smart contract compatibility. It's not EVM compatible. So you couldn't have stuff like AMMs. Like you couldn't launch meme coins. You couldn't have lending, like smart contract lending, like Aave or something like that. You couldn't have NFTs, couldn't have derivatives, anything like that. You can't really build on Keeta. So it's just a payments rail. So it's trying to take the place of something like Visa or something like Ripple, which is no small feat. It's not like that's really damaged the total addressable market, but it isn't a general purpose layer 1 like something like Solana, which still is really, really fast, but can do a lot more things. For that reason, I do think it's going to have a smaller monetary premium, like something like Ethereum, something like Solana. Obviously, it's not being 100% valued on the amount of revenue that they're earning. A lot of it is a monetary premium, meaning that people buy NFTs with Ethereum, so they price things in Ethereum, or they use Solana in DeFi and they use it as collateral to borrow against. So it has this moneyness, like Ethereum, Solana has this moneyness, this monetary premium that I'm not sure Keeta is going to get. And we have yet to see how much revenue that Keeta could make. Like it's going to have to have a lot of adoption because it's going to be super, super cheap to use. It's going to need a lot of transactions in order to generate enough revenue to make it look attractive on a price to sales ratio or a price to earnings ratio. Like I think Solana is like a 100 price to earnings ratio. Ethereum probably a good bit higher, the amount of revenue that they're generating in comparisons to the market cap. Whereas something like Keeta, because similar to Solana, like Solana, it's really, really cheap to use, but the reason its price to earnings ratio isn't like 1,000 or 2,000, isn't like crazy high, is because it's so much activity on Solana. So people are doing so much transactions, and even though they're really cheap, the transactions, there's so many of them that the revenue is still quite high. Whereas something like Keeta, it hasn't been proven that anyone's going to use it yet. Maybe some banks are already kind of using it, but I think in my opinion it has to actually show that it's going to have some use cases, it's going to have some uses. But like everything I did talk about does say that it is possible that institutions, massive institutions, could adopt it because it's extremely fast and it has all this compliance tech built into it. So for me, I want to see the mainnet going live. I want to see it being stress tested and its actual transaction per second, its actual usage, and the actual amount of revenue that it's generating before I buy into it. So I'm kind of thinking maybe it's going to consolidate here for a while, and if it starts to pass my tests or if it starts to show promise in the things that I just said, then I could potentially invest slowly over the summer. But for now, I'm just going to stay sidelined. It is a really, really interesting project. It is incredibly interesting technology that it can process that many transactions, the fastest blockchain or the highest TPS blockchain ever. So it is very impressive from that perspective, but in my opinion, it still has to prove itself a little bit. But yeah, I know people are comparing it to other chains, like the market cap of Sui, the market cap of Say, the market cap of Algorand. In comparisons to other layer ones, it's extremely cheap. Like it's at the moment an 800 million FTV, whereas a lot of layer ones are valued in the tens of billions, even hundreds of billions, or even like single digit billions for garbage L1s that no one uses. So if this got a little bit of adoption, like there is massive upside if you're comparing it to other layer ones. But like I said, I don't think it's going to have the same kind of monetary premium that other layer ones do have. So to conclude, I do think this is a really interesting project. It is it is a project that I would be interested in buying. I'm going to hold my horses here just to see what happens over the next few months, maybe do a little bit more research. But yeah, I wouldn't like say this is like, because it launched at such a small market cap and it is still technically not a really massive market cap, it probably is potentially a decent investment. But yeah, for me personally, not financial advice. I'm just going to wait it out a little bit and see what happens. So hope you enjoyed the video, hope you learned something, and thank you so much for watching. Cheers.